Hello, everyone, and welcome to this information session on human research ethics. My name is Sean Lacey. I'm the Research Integrity and Compliance Officer for the university. And in this session, I'm going to just take you through, I suppose, the process that we have in the university around human research ethics. Just how do we navigate, I suppose, different parts of the application process. What I'd give you an outline of how reviews are actually done, both for, I suppose, internal applicants and external applicants. And then we're going to look at a few of the new supporting documents that we have, or guideline documents that are on our human research ethics webpage as well. So a bit to cover, but all should be fine, hopefully. So just to start off with, just kind of, I suppose, to remind everyone, just in terms of research ethics in the university. So any research that involves humans as participants must undergo a formal ethical review prior to the commencement of the research. That is part of the policy. That's the policy that we have in the university. That policy in itself, that I quote that bullet point there from, was implemented in November 22. So it's nearly there for 3 years at this point. Just maybe as an example of what is research that involves human participants, and this is not an exhaustive list. Those that would have maybe attended previous training sessions by me would always know that I'm cautious when giving lists, because I'm slow for people to think, look, that a list is definite, that there's always can be other options there. So I don't want it necessarily to be seen as actual checklist, but nonetheless, it's obviously quite good to have examples as well. So examples of where research is being conducted for on humans would be where, if you're looking at questionnaires, if you have web surveys, interviews, observations, focus groups, if you're looking at maybe the data that has already been collected, so that idea of secondary data that has had the appropriate informed consent with it. If you're looking at collecting data through the internet, so internet mediated research, and all those examples, again, they're called out in our human research ethics policy. But essentially, if we're collecting information from humans that we're going to use for research purposes, there needs to be human research ethical oversight. And that doesn't matter how small. Like sometimes we could get queried, oh, look, it's just a quick survey that I'm going to be doing. And that's absolutely fine. Quick surveys are super. But if the quick survey is for research purposes, it still needs ethical oversight. So it's just kind of bear that in mind. A couple of points then, just to mention in terms of the documentation that we have as a bit of a reminder, and I suppose a lot of people may be familiar with this, but just it's no harm to kind of flag it. We have a policy, a human research ethics policy. We have a human research ethics committee. So obviously in terms of reference, we have 2 application forms in the university, a minimal risk one and a full ethical review. So we have a screening checklist that gives guidance to which application to complete. That will be most appropriate based on, I suppose, the research context, the research participants that you have, the research instrument that you're using as well. And that's what the screening checklist would do. And then what we also have then is we this pre-approved procedure template. So this, and I'm going to have a slide of that now in a couple of minutes. And these slides will be shared afterwards as well. But the pre-approved procedure is, I suppose, there's 2 folds to it. It's if somebody is conducting research as part of a talk program that is beyond minimal risk, then it's to follow a procedure to do that, because our human research ethics policy calls out that research that is conducted for talk programs, so that's undergraduate or talk masters, must be at a minimal risk level. It can't be beyond minimal risk. But yet, in some academic areas, that I suppose the research even at talk program level may be by default beyond minimum risk. It could be their bread and butter, and it's not a case of, oh, you can't do that, but it would be a case of, well, what you need to do in advance of that is to have a procedure in place that would have had oversight from the HREC. And if you adopt that procedure, then that reduces your research to minimum risk. So there's a bit to that. I'll have a slide on it, but I'm happy to take any questions as well afterwards as well. So all these documents then that we have here are actually up on our human research ethics webpage, and Sinead will pop that link into the chat there, and we'll take a quick look at it towards the end of the session as well. When it comes to the actual policy, and so there's a good few bits to the policy, but maybe just kind of to flag a couple of points here in particular. So when you're submitting an application to the ethics committee, you have to have evidence of research ethics training. There's many avenues for that. We have a document up again on the webpage giving direction to what routes you could go potentially for that. We have Epigeum as one platform. We have a digital badge within the university around research ethics application process. But equally, we may have people on the call here, or people that may be watching the recording, that maybe have done an ethics module as part of their own studies, and that can be recognized as well. So it's done on a case-by-case basis also. We have a HREC, so a Human Research Ethics Committee, that do facilitate the ethical review of postgraduate research and staff research. Okay, and that's important. So if it's research being conducted at for undergraduate or taught postgraduate, that is handled at academic unit level. Yeah, which I've just mentioned there in that bullet point. And then when it comes to students submitting ethics application forms, it is to be submitted by their actual supervisor. Okay, so I would imagine the student would complete the ethics application form, because there's great learning in actually completing an ethics application form. But for it to be submitted to the HREC, it needs to be submitted by the actual supervisor. Okay. And then just the last part on this slide is it's important that when you submit an ethics application form, that there has been the appropriate thought already gone into, I suppose, the research design, the methods. If the application is very much slapped together and it doesn't have the appropriate, I suppose, thought and the preparation in advance, it will just be returned. Because, I mean, that's not fair on the actual committee members that will be reviewing it. So it is important that when an application is submitted, the appropriate oversight has happened previous to that as well. Okay. Now that doesn't mean, you know, the application can't have a few flaws in it. I mean, these things can actually be picked up on, but I suppose the main, I suppose, foundation of it should be solid when you're coming to submit an ethics application form. I suppose ultimately the analogy we often use is like the HREC is not like an NCT. So you just throw the car in and see what comes out. That's really not how the HREC actually works. Okay. It's natural that when we are conducting research that our plans, we may have the best plans in place at the start, but our research may change. Absolutely no problem if the research changes, but if there's ethical implications to those research changes, then you need to notify the HREC before proceeding. And we have a form to capture that, and I'll sign to that as well. Also, then when you're finished your study, it is important to kind of close it out from the HREC's point of view. So we have an end-of-study report form. So when you're finished your research that you've got ethical approval on, you just notify the HREC on that as well. We have a policy around, sorry, the policy, no, we don't have the policy, we have one policy, but it applies to external researchers requesting access to research participants in the university. I have a flow chart coming up in a couple of minutes that will talk through that as well. Okay, so I won't dwell on that too much. And it is important to note that the university does have the right to overrule. So somebody may have got ethical approval from another university, may wish to come to engage with our students or staff for some reason, may have ethical approval, but the ethical approval may not meet the standards of what we have within the university, and the university has the right to overrule, and that's something that's called out in our policy as well. Okay. I think it's no harm maybe just to be aware of, look, what is the review process that we have then in the university? So we've two formal procedures in the university. So one is if you're looking at if the HREC are reviewing applications from university staff or research students, and then the other one is around external access. So if you have an external researcher that is looking to gain access to MTU participants, whether it's students or staff, what avenues do they go? So the first one, which is where most of the work actually is, as in the most of the work being where we get most of our business, just to kind of talk through the process there. So an ethics application form is submitted to the HREC. The application is then screened by the HREC administrator. If based on the screening of the application, is it ready for review? If it's not ready for review, then obviously it will be sent back to the applicant where the outstanding issues will be flagged. So hopefully then those outstanding issues will be addressed, and then it kind of circles back. And then it's a case of it's handled by it goes back to the administrator, and then the administrator then determines, look, what type of application actually is. And the administrator that we have in the university for the HREC is Sinead McDonald, who's on the call here as well. So what type of HREC, what type of ethics application has been submitted? Is it minimal risk or is it full ethical review? If it's minimal risk, it's done remotely. So this doesn't go to an actual meeting, a monthly meeting of the ethics committee. If you submit a minimal risk application, there's no kind of monthly deadline date. You submit it when you're ready, when you have it. It is assigned to a chairperson. So we have two chairpersons within the university, within the HREC. Within the HREC, we have two chairpersons. So it's assigned to one of them and two members to review. And they do that kind of using a form that we have set up here. And it's all done essentially remotely without any kind of meeting, unless a meeting is required. and then the applicant will get their information back from that. Okay, so I'll come to that now in a second. But essentially, it's just kind of flag that the review of minimum risk applications is done remotely. When it comes to the applications that would be full ethical review, or maybe you're looking at a pre-approved procedure, as in looking to get a pre-approved procedure up and running at the very start, that is reviewed at the monthly meeting. I'll share the dates of the monthly meeting now in a couple of minutes. And when it's reviewed in the monthly meeting, it is the two chairpersons we have review the application, and it's assigned to 2 to 3 members as well. Now, at a monthly meeting, any member or every member has the right to give an opinion on this particular application, but it's assigned to 2 to 3 members to give a really in-depth review that would be experts in the actual area as well. This depend irrespective of which avenue we're going down here, the decision for the review then is ratified by the HREC chairpersons, depending it's chairpersons if it's the full or pre-approved procedure, it's a chairperson if it's minimum risk. And then the outcomes that we have from that would be it's approved. If it's approved, then you get a letter of approval, and you'll get an approval number, which is obviously something that's very important, especially if you're going down the route of maybe publishing at a later stage. A lot of journals require that code that you'd have for, or the approval number from the ethics committee, so that we'd provide that. If it's provisionally approved, that would mean that there's some kind of minor amendments that need addressing, or minor issues that need addressing. These could be either requirements or recommendations. For provisionally approved, it essentially it goes back to the applicant with these requirements and recommendations. The applicant will address it, send it back into the HREC, and it goes to the chairperson. So it's because it's provisionally approved, it doesn't have to go through the original process again, whichever avenue it went down. Okay, so if it's provisionally approved, it's handled by the chairperson. So that's quite a fast process as well. If it's a resubmit outcome that you have, then that obviously means there's a lot of, I suppose, ethical matters that need addressing, a lot of requirements, a lot of recommendations that need addressing. So when you do address that, and then you bring it back to the HREC, it goes through whatever process it went through before. If it's minimal risk, it goes back to the original reviewers and the chairpersons. If it's full ethical review, it goes back to the next monthly meeting because it's a resubmission. And then there can be a few cases of where it may be rejected. It could be rejected because maybe the research that's being conducted, we don't provide the ethical oversight for that. And an example of that would be clinical trials. Like, we are not a clinical trials research ethics committee. If you end up submitting an application that was touching on clinical trials, your best bet then would be to go through the Cork Research Ethics Committee, so CREC. That's the avenue that you would go. As you can appreciate, this is just one slide. The procedure itself, and it's on the webpage, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes, but the procedure itself, there's multiple pages. So I'm condensing it into one page, one kind of flow chart. So as you can appreciate, not all aspects are covered, but the main points are there, if you want more information, there is obviously going to be, you have the main document to look at. The other avenue that we have then is when we have an external researcher that is looking to gain access to MTU participants. And this is important because sometimes we may have a colleague in another university that might email us and ask us, look, will you share this survey? Something like that, okay? And obviously we want to do that. We want to help. But if that survey is being shared and it's for research purposes, it needs to have ethical oversight as well, okay, before doing that. And that's something just to be really aware of, okay? So if it's an external researcher that reaches out to you to look to share something, you should really signpost them to the HREC. There is a procedure, and we've this actually infograph on the webpage as well, so you could actually signpost them to that, and I'll show you where that information actually is. But basically, they need to kind of contact the HREC. When they contact the HREC, the administrator, Sinead, will then try to determine, look, do they have ethical approval from their host institution? They should really, okay? They should really have ethical approval from their host institution. In certain circumstances, if they don't, maybe we can allow them to go through our review process, but it really depends what their host institution, like if the host institution doesn't have an ethics committee, as an example, that's maybe something that we can support. But if the host institution does have an ethics committee, well, then the researcher needs to go through their own institution first because they are affiliated with that institution, okay? So, and to be fair, the majority of the time, the external researcher does have ethical approval from their host institution, which means you're going through this avenue. So then Sinead then would look for, well, what can we have your ethics application form? Can we have your letter of approval from your host institution? And then would send that to the chairperson. So this does not need to go to the actual ethics committee as a whole. It goes to the chairpersons. The chairpersons make a decision based on the review that they have, And the decision will be to accept the ethical approval from the host institution, which means the researcher then completes the minimal risk form, but only certain sections of the minimal risk form, so not the entire form, because they already have the ethical approval. And that's just for our own bookkeeping or our own, I've lost the word, but our own reporting, essentially. I've lost the word that I was going to use there. But or else the chairpersons will say that it's not accepted, and because it's unclear and ambiguous, which means then, look, they either go back to their own host institution or they go back, they go through our full process. It has never come to that point, but look, there obviously has to be that scenario of where the chairpersons have the right to not accept something as well, and where does the researcher go in that case. I just did touch on the pre-approved procedures, and maybe that's because that may be familiar to some, may not be familiar to others. So again, if research is being conducted at top program levels, so at undergraduate or top postgraduate, it needs to be at a minimal risk level. That is part of our university policy. If there are definitely certain academic units that conduct research at top program level that's beyond a minimal risk because it's their bread and butter, it's the nature of their program, and we are very supportive of that. But what they need to do in that case is they need to go through the HREC with a procedure, which would then be approved by the HREC, and then they can adopt that procedure then going forward. And when they adopt that procedure going forward, it's at minimal risk level, so it can be handled at the academic unit. They don't need to come back to the HREC. They'll handle that themselves, where they inform the students, look, that this is the roadmap, this is the procedure that you follow when you're conducting this particular type of research. I'm happy to take any questions on that, because I know there's a bit to that, and obviously, again, condensing it onto one slide. Equally, we do have instances of where we have staff conducting research that conduct research of a very similar type on a regular basis. And so what they've looked to do is try engage with the HREC, where they have a procedure in place that would pretty much kind of outline the research they conduct. You know, if it's a survey, like they do their survey research very similarly year on year. So they look at having a procedure in place for that. So that means then that when the procedure would be approved, obviously with a bit of over and back, but then if they want to adopt a procedure, it is an expedited process. And where in our minimal risk application form, there's a section of, look, are you adopting a pre-approved procedure? And then if you are, you only complete certain aspects of the form because you've already gone through the rigorous overarching kind of ethical review. And this again will be just for our own reporting, that we'd actually have a note of the pre-approved procedure being used. And that's for staff conducting research. Or maybe, well, we haven't come across research students leveraging a pre-approved procedure, typically because a research student generally is doing something novel, so they haven't leveraged a pre-approved procedure. That doesn't mean they can't, but the majority of the time that comes from staff. When it comes to the application forms, just to kind of flag it with everyone, that when you're submitting your ethics application form, it is important, and it's part of the policy that we have here in the university, that there's a data protection impact assessment screening checklist done. So this is up on the webpage. So there's these 9 or 10 questions that you have. If you're taking note of all of that, that's fine. Then your screening checklist is done. You submit that as part of your application. If you tick yes to any of those points in the checklist, then you need to get a data protection impact assessment done. I'll show you where we've more supporting information on that. But ultimately, that assessment needs to be done before you engage with the HREC. And you basically link in with our data protection officer to get a data protection impact assessment done. And then that's what's attached to your application when you look to engaging with the HREC. So there's one of two things will be attached to your application. It's the screening checklist where you've ticked no to everything, or it is a data protection impact assessment review done by our DPO. I've already mentioned that when you're submitting your ethics application form, you need to have evidence of research ethics training, and there's obviously information on that on the webpage. And also, just to kind of remind people that when you're submitting your ethics application form, typically you're using a research instrument. More often than not, there's a research instrument involved. Typically, you are engaging with humans because that's why you're going through the HREC process. So typically, there would be an information sheet, there would be a consent form, and more often than there can be exceptions. There are questions that you're going to be asking the participants. And what we'd expect to see as part of the application that you're submitting is your information sheet, is your consent form, and indicative questions. So we don't necessarily need the final questions, because we do appreciate that maybe the final questions aren't actually finalized the day before you're engaging. And look, that's can be the nature of research. But we do expect to see indicative questions where you're basically saying the questions that you're going to be asking will be in line with these ones, which basically means you're not going to be asking anything more sensitive than what you have provided to the HREC. And if you ask something more sensitive than what you provided to the HREC, you should either be notifying the HREC, and if you don't notify the HREC, then that will be deemed an unacceptable research practice because the HREC would have given you approval based on the information that you provided. And if you deviate from that information, that is deemed an unacceptable research practice, and there would be kind of a sanction to that, but that's a different talk to actually have. Yeah, and then just maybe the last thing then, and I'm just going to go to the webpage just to show you the webpage. And I want to show you the 3 new documents we have, and then we can open the floor for questions. But if you have any questions, even as a follow-on to this, we obviously have our email address, so that's managed by Sinead, so hrec@mtu.ie. Sinead will just pop that into the chat, and we have our webpage here as well. And I'm just going to go to the webpage just to kind of talk through it. I think I should have it here. Yeah, here I have it. So I think the Zoom should be fine for everyone. I'm not going to go through everything in the webpage, but just kind of signposting to where different things actually are. So if you come open up the webpage, I'll zoom in a small bit actually. I just think it just seems a bit small there. I'll go there. Okay, hopefully that's okay. So when you open up the webpage, we have the policy at the very start. We have our 2 application forms that you can use. And then down here, you have a screening checklist that gives you guidance to which application form to use. Obviously, all this information is on this webpage, but all our research and innovation policy and procedure documents, they're up on the mtu.ie/policies webpage underneath these sections. I won't read out the whole thing there. You can see it there. So, I mean, obviously, we're focusing on the research ethics, or more so the human research ethics here, but we have a lot of policies and procedures relating to research and innovation in the university, which are informative. And so if you're looking for more information, that's the link to it. Different bits and pieces here around guidance in terms of what do we think is a research study involving human participants. That was on the slide deck that I would have showed earlier. Here we would just outline, look, that the minimum risk is done on a rolling basis here, while the full ethical review is done at a monthly meeting. Then here are the deadline dates for if you want your application reviewed at a monthly meeting, here are the deadline dates for the academic year. As typically as a guideline, when you submit an ethics application form, if it's minimal risk, and you get your application identifier, so it's screened, I would have mentioned that. Once you pass the screening, you then get an application identifier, which is kind of your own personal tracking mechanism if you want to reach out to the HREC afterwards. But when you get that identifier, typically you will have your initial outcome letter within 5 weeks. That's kind of the timeline. And it is typically less than 5 weeks, but we just say 5 weeks just to allow those couple of days. And that's well above the average nationally in terms of ethical review. So your initial outcome letter then will either be approval, provisionally approved, resubmit, or reject. Reject is very, very rare, but obviously it is there as something as well. When it comes to the different bits and pieces that we have to support the application process, we have these guidelines, instructions to researchers preparing human research ethics applications. So again, I'm not reading through this. Again, it's just to kind of show, look, that there is a bit of more information there. There's information on the committee. I think that's important. There's important full transparency around, look, who the committee actually are, how we conduct our work. So we conduct our work based on these 2 procedures. I've already talked through the procedures. Here is the terms of reference for the HREC that you have if you want more information, and then here are the actual HREC members that we have. And so you can see that it's quite a big committee. It works really, really well. Feedback is very positive, both from members and actually applicants as well. And we always welcome feedback. Okay, so I mean, and if you ever find that there's something that maybe could be done differently, I mean, or better, please reach out to us. You have the email address there. There's a couple of resources. I'll come back to that one because that's the one I want to kind of finish up on, is the resources. So I'm going to jump down to the bottom here. I mentioned about research ethics training, that you need to have evidence of research ethics training when you're submitting an ethics application form. We have examples of research ethics training here in this document here in the bottom part. There, I mentioned pre-approved procedures that we have in the university. So we have a good few pre-approved procedures. So this is where there's talk programs have engaged with the HREC, and those talk programs are conducting research that's beyond minimal risk. So here are the various ones we have. There's actually 5 more, I think, roughly to be uploaded in the coming week as well. And it's great to see engagement from the community in terms of these procedures. And again, feedback has been very positive on that. there is a template that we use. It's a template. It can be tweaked. Here, if you want, you can download the template here, and that's a guideline to look how do you complete these procedures. And obviously, you have all the other procedures that have been approved that you can use as a bit of a guideline as well. Equally, you could be conducting your own research, and you could find actually the research. I'm only using this as an example. You could find, look, the research you're conducting is qualitative education research using focus groups. So there's nothing stopping you using that procedure. That's why they're up there, they're openly available. So if you're conducting research that falls under one of these categories, then by all means you can draw on that procedure. Now, obviously, there's some procedures that wouldn't be applicable to other disciplines. Like here, this is a particular one for a particular undergraduate program, but you hopefully get the idea. Finally, then, the resource that we have here in the university in terms of, I suppose, to support applicants and, to be honest, to support the reviewers, to support the committee as well. So we've guidelines around the gatekeeper approval. So that's a new document. I'll share my screen. I am sharing my screen, but I'll give a quick look at that because that's a new document I want to talk about. The same one here with this compensation. So guidance document and that I'll circle back to that and give a rationale to why we're doing this. We have published last year guidelines to research data retention. It can often be queried, look, how long do I store my data before I go off and share it openly or destroy it or archive it? Like, what's the timeline for that? And so we have some guidelines around the timelines for actually storing your data. I've already mentioned the data protection impact assessment. So we had an information session led by Carmel Hayes, our data protection officer, back in February of this year. The video and the slides from that are available there. And that gives guidance to engaging in that data protection impact assessment process. It's a minority of applications that we get that have to go through the whole process. All applications have to screen, that's part of the policy. If it's no to the screening, that's fine, you progress to the HREC. If it's yes to anything in the screening, you need to go to Carmel first before you come to the HREC. I've mentioned that we get response. You obviously get an initial outcome letter after indicatively less than 5 weeks. If that outcome letter is provisionally approved or resubmit, then you need to respond. This is the form that you'd use when you're responding to the points, that the requirements, the recommendations by the HREC. This next one I'm going to talk about that's a new document, another guideline one. Then there's this one here. I clicked that by accident, but anyway, there's this one here, amendment. So it's part and parcel of research that things can actually change. If your research does change and you've got ethical approval for the research that's changing, obviously then that's an amendment that you need to make, and we've a form to kind of capture that. And then here, the last one then is our end of study report form. Okay. So look, I'm just going to give a quick, because I know now I'm conscious of time and I definitely want to allow time for questions that people, those that are here may have. So I'm just going to go quick look at the 3 new documents. So there are 3 guideline documents here that we have. So the first one, look, I'll go to the gatekeeper one here that we have here. So this is the gatekeeper one. So we just found, particularly in the last academic year, that there was a bit of confusion and a bit of inconsistency around the gatekeeper approval, that if we're looking to link in with students within a particular academic unit or maybe across the entire university, does the person that has gatekeeper kind of access to that allows the access, are they supportive of the actual research? Because maybe they are supportive, but maybe they're saying, look, now is not a good time to be conducting it because the students or the staff have been inundated with research of late. So, but there's kind of have that bit of communication around us as well. So what I have here, and again, I won't read the whole document here, but it just kind of gives a small bit of guidance. I have a bit highlighted. That was more to remind myself here. But look here, if you're looking to gain access to students in a particular academic unit, do you have approval from the head of department or their nominee? Each academic unit might have a different process, so it's a bit open there for that. If you're looking for access to students in an entire faculty, have you got approval from the head of faculty? If you're looking for access to students across the entire university, have you got approval from the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Registrar? Now, that approval actually has been delegated to the RICO, so the Research Integrity and Compliance Officer. So if you're looking to gain access to all the students in the university, have you got approval for that? And it's the similar process then for staff. If you're looking to gain access to staff in an academic or a research entity, have you got approval from the head of function? Essentially, same idea for the faculty. If you're looking to gain access to staff from a central support service area, have you got approval from that head of function? If it's the entire university, then it goes to the human resources manager, and that approval has been delegated to the RICO also. And then just to flag, because it can happen that you might want to gain access to students, we'll say, in a particular department. The head of department may be one of the researchers, may be part of that research team. So typically, the head of department would give you the gatekeeper approval. But if the head of department is part of the research team, they can't be giving gatekeeper approval to something that they're going to be conducting. So it needs to go to the next level up. And that's how we generally do conduct all our business within the university, that if there's a potential conflict of interest from a particular function, it goes to the next level. And so it's just highlighting that bit there, okay? Because we do come across instances of where a head of function is actually the researcher themselves, so they can't obviously give the gatekeeper because there's a conflict of interest there to that. Then there's a form for this. Now, this is not, hopefully, not to deter anybody, okay? This form is literally, like, if you're looking to get approval from the gatekeeper, I suppose, to a certain extent, needs to know what are they given approval for. I would imagine they don't have the time to review the entire ethics application form. Now, maybe they do, and if they do, absolutely brilliant. But if they don't, it's important that they at least have oversight of, look, well, what is actually the research? So these sections that we have here in section 3, these are taken from the minimal risk application form. So it's not looking for the researcher to go off and complete a new form. This is a copy and paste exercise, so that when you're seeking approval from the gatekeeper, at least you're giving them a condensed version to what the research actually is, so that they know what they're given approval for. And it's just to kind of, I suppose, have a consistent approach across the university, that when a gatekeeper is giving approval, that it's consistent, I suppose, to the information that they actually have. So I won't go through all this. I'm happy to take any questions. Like, it is literally copy and paste from the ethics application form. The only question that's different is this one. Simply a tick box. Is the application minimal risk or full ethical review? That's the only thing. Everything previous, above and below, is actually taken from the ethics application form, irrespective of whether it's minimal risk or full ethical review. And then there's a place for a signature. And then it's just flagging, just to be, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, that gatekeeper approval isn't the final say to conducting the research. There needs to be ethical approval. That has to be done. That is policy within the university. Okay, so we put this document together as a guideline to look, how do we seek gatekeeper approval, and hopefully the form will be something that's of benefit, of help. We're happy to tweak this. I mean, this has obviously been rolled out this academic year, and we're happy to take feedback on it. Is it right? Is it hitting the right mark, or is it off? And please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will address the feedback as best as possible. The other document that I have here, and again, I won't spend too long on this, is there's just 2 other guideline documents that are new. One is around if you're going to use incentives of compensation in research studies. There's nothing wrong with using incentives on compensation in research studies. We're not saying that you can't do that. But what we just felt would be important is to flag a couple of things. Basically give a bit of information to look, what are the ethical implications if you're going to be using incentives and compensation for research. If you are using it, I've highlighted a couple of points here. This was more just to keep me on point here when I was sharing this. I'll actually zoom in a small bit there. The highlighted bit isn't that, oh, this is uber important over everything else. It was just more for me to kind of know what to say here. If you're going to be using it, incentives, compensation, remuneration, reimbursements, or anything of that kind, that needs to be included in the ethics application form, whether it's human research ethics or animal research and education ethics. It has to be included, okay? Because there can be ethical implications to using incentives or compensation. Those ethical implications we kind of highlight here, or mention. I won't read the document now, but they are mentioned here to look, what's the thought process here. And then I just felt it'd be just useful to say, look, payments should match the time and effort involved, and they shouldn't be so high that it seems like nearly a consultancy rate that people are getting, or that it's a lure. Look, I'm going to do this because I'll get money. That it shouldn't be that case, okay? And so it's important that that's kind of flagged. There's a couple of questions here that you need to kind of think about, and this is ultimately what the ethics committee will be thinking about when they're reviewing an application that has an incentive or compensation in it. It's these: does the payment encourage someone to take part? I won't read them all out. They're there. It's just kind of, I suppose, signposting to things to maybe for you to be thinking of, because ultimately it's what the ethics committee will be thinking of when they're reviewing an application like this. The other thing then with this one is, when you are promoting your research, and if there's going to be an incentive there, or reimbursement or remuneration, it can't be the main thing. It can't be, oh, do you want to win €50? Go complete this survey. Or do you want to get €50? Do you want to be entered into a draw to win an iPad? Go complete this survey. It can't be like that, okay? It needs the focus has to be the research. And then it's obviously what is, if there's going to be some prize or something like that, it can be mentioned. Should be mentioned, but it can't be front and center. And look, it's kind of giving some information on that there as well. And then there's different bits and pieces afterwards in terms of compensation. Just again, more guidance. I won't repeat myself there to the various bits, but I'm happy to take any questions. And equally, we can take any questions after this, but I was going to say that equally, this may take a bit of time to kind of digest. So if there's any questions afterwards, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll always get back to you. The last one, and this is just a shorter one, this is in terms of the amendments. So just to kind of let you know, in the last academic year, the HREC received 55 amendment requests. Now, on average, in a full year, the HREC would receive roughly in around, kind of can be a bit up or more than that, around 100 applications in a year, 100 to 110 applications. And in the last academic year, we had 55 amendment requests. Now, there's nothing obviously wrong with that. I mean, research can change. Absolutely, we're completely supportive of it. But then what we felt is there's so many amendment requests coming in that it's important to have a guidance on, look, what will be a minor amendment so that, look, yes, it's important to notify the HREC, and the HREC will generally kind of say, look, that's good, and record it. Or what will be a major amendment that would require a new application? Because we'd hope that that would help everybody involved. So firstly here, we just give a definition to what major, I mean, it's not a formal definition, but we give a definition to what a minor and major amendment are. And then down here, we have a checklist. So, and again, this is guidance. And if there's kind of questions after somebody goes through this, then you reach out to the HREC. But it's a case of, look, I'll just mention a couple of them. I won't mention all of them. Is the target population changing? Like if your target population is changing, that has an ethical implication. So if it's a yes to that, then that would require a new applications. Okay. So, and I just want to maybe, sorry, yeah, I said change. I was thinking my wording was wrong there. So I didn't read it out the exact way. So if the target population is staying the same, if it's a yes, then that's fine. But if it's a no here to this, then you can see up here, if there's a no to any of the below, then a new human research ethics application form may be appropriate. We do put in the word may because it can vary as well. Like, so, I mean, but if you're falling into the no category here, you kind of getting a signpost to where you're going, but you reach out to the HREC for a bit of guidance. If you're looking at extending your study more, which it does happen to researchers want to extend their study, but if you're extending your study nearly a half more, as in 50% more than what the original approval was, realistically, then that's going to be a new application as well. If I scroll down to the next one there, for major amendments, if you're looking at basically changing your research instrument, that's a new application. Okay, like if you're changing your research instrument from a survey to a focus group or vice versa, how the information leaflet, the informed consent, the data management, all that changes if the instrument changes. So that would be a major amendment, and that means it's a new application. If you're looking at, if there's a change that impacts, I think this one's an obvious one, but we put it in there nonetheless. If there's a change to your study that's going to impact your data protection impact assessment or any data sharing agreements that you might have in place, then that would require a new application as well. So look, hopefully that, I mean, obviously I'm only mentioning 1 or 2 points here, but hopefully this document is of help to when it comes, if you're going down the route of an amendment, what would we see as a minor amendment, which is something that's ultimately for noting by the HREC, or what would be seen as a major amendment, which is something that would require a new application. And look, that's essentially it for this. Thanks very much for joining. Hope you find it a benefit, and we're very happy to take any questions here or our contact details as well.